Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Finca La Bonita Anaerobic Natural Processed Colombia from Jacu. There's the container right there. And Jacu, based out of Ålesund, Norway. And this is part 24 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series. And stay tuned until the very end as we will reveal our top 5 favorite coffees from this Advent calendar. Now this is Jacu's 6th appearance on this channel, as they've appeared in every KaffeBox Advent Calendar series we've done up to this point. And one thing I've noticed from this coffee roaster is that they tend to include a lot more of the experimental, heavier processed coffees in general. So I won't lie, I was a little disappointed to see this coffee as the second coffee they went with, given how much of a positive experience I had with their wash-processed Kenyan coffee, and given that anaerobic natural processed Colombian coffees are my least favorite coffee in the entire world. But given the positive experience with their previous coffee, and given that this is a geisha, it'll be interesting to see how this one turns out. And again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting wheel are made with the V60. This cup right here is made with the Chemex, and Jacu does have a brew guide, which translates to a 15.5 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 93 degrees Celsius. Now, in terms of roast profile for this coffee, it's even more difficult and tricky to tell with anaerobic natural processed coffees. This one did have a little bit of brightness, so you can tell that it wasn't overly developed. At the same time, it feels like there had to be a little bit more development to it, given the processing method. So very tricky to tell, not necessarily the most developed coffee we've had, definitely not the lightest coffee we've had, very much in the middle of the spectrum on this one. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. And first impression, and clearly the first thing I was going to look for in this coffee was any sort of clarity, given the processing method we had. And to my surprise, there was a slight bit of clarity. So we were already off to a much more positive than expected start because it wasn't quite as heavy and overbearing as I expected going into the coffee. It did smell very much like it was going to be, so pulling out some defined notes in this coffee was a nice little positive for me. As the first thing I noticed actually was a very bright component in this coffee, and it was very reminiscent to me of actually more of an apple candy. Now, if I remember correctly, I believe that they have some sort of apple syrup note listed on here, and that makes sense. This was the most pronounced characteristic for me. It came out in a lot more sweet and defined of a manner than I typically experience from apple notes listed in coffees, as those usually just come out as some sort of generic acidity for me. But in this case, it had a little bit of definition to it. Now, while the cup does finish off into that fermenty chocolate manner, it doesn't last as long as most anaerobic coffees. So even though it had that fermenty chocolate finish I don't particularly like, it still didn't continue to last much longer than it needed to in this cup. The strong apple-like sweetness is complemented by this interesting spice component, and I would say that that's actually the second most defining characteristic of this coffee. The combination of the two very much reminded me of a spiced mulled apple cider, so that's kind of the best way I could describe this coffee. It felt very fall with that interesting kind of chocolate finish to it, which didn't actually last the entire duration of the cup. As it cooled down, that slightly dissipated, so it wasn't quite as chocolate-heavy fermenty as typical. There is also a slight bit of the red fermenty berry aspect that I typically pick up from natural processed coffees in general, most distinctly Central and South American coffees. Felt a little bit of that in this cup, as well as a strong savoriness. If I recall correctly, I believe they had a black tea note listed on here, and I typically like my black tea to be in a slightly more delicate manner. This one was a little heavy, a little strong in this coffee, but that's not too surprising as everything in this coffee was pretty intense all around. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, just one level 5. That's already off to a surprising start, but one level 5, and it's the finish. And interestingly, it's not as strong of a finish as that necessarily indicates. Typically, that's a true level 5. This is actually on the lower side of the level 5, and I had to decide between going on the high side of the level 4 or the low side of the level 5, but this one just really had a finish, pretty long-lasting finish, not relative to what it is, but relative to most coffees in general. So I still had to score at that level 5, though I definitely considered a level 4 for this coffee. And we'll go to level 4s. We'll start with the sweetness, level 4 sweetness. I like the sweetness in this one a lot more than the previous coffee we reviewed, which was a natural processed coffee as well, natural processed Honduran coffee. But this one had a little bit more of this apple sweetness, which is a little unique in its own sense. Again, I don't typically experience that too often from coffees, so that's a nice sweetness in this one. Acidity, level 4. as mentioned, it was one of the more defining factors. I definitely pulled out brightness right from the onset, so I could definitely chart out the level 4. There was part of me that initially thought a level 5, but towards the end, I said there are coffees we've had in this advent calendar slightly more acidic than this one. I'm thinking of the Kenya from Coffee Collective. Level 4 for spice. Yes, as I said, this was kind of the secondary characteristic in this coffee. Could definitely feel a lot of it. I had a little bit of difficulty defining it. As you can see, the clarity is not too high in this coffee, but a little bit more of kind of a generic spice in it. Citrus fruit, level 4. And I typically put the apple in that citrus fruit category. There's a slight additional citric aspect to this coffee, but for the most part, it's a sweeter apple. That's what contributes to that citrus fruit being at that level 4. Chocolate level 4, that's really nice. I'm happy that it's not at the level 5. That's a nice change of pace for anaerobic, natural processed Colombian coffees. And if anything, it might slightly be on the lower side of level 4. There are times where I actually don't taste it too much in the finish, so I still think it belongs to the level 4 mark. There are times it is quite heavy, so level 4 works for me. Savoriness, level 4, that has to do with the spice. It also has to do with just kind of the generic savoriness in the cup altogether. Always really difficult to define a lot of the characteristics in these coffees when they don't have great clarity. So savoriness, level 4, I like that there. And then I think the most important thing we need to discuss outside of those is the cleanliness, level 2. I think that's kind of a big deal actually, because for the most part, I think every anaerobic natural processed Colombian we've ever reviewed has either hit a level 1 or it's been on the low side of level 2. This doesn't have great clarity. I'm not going to act like it's a true level 2. It's probably on the lower side of level 2 as well. But just by reaching that level 2 mark, that's a nice little positive, as I was able to enjoy some additional aspects of this coffee as opposed to the kind of generic overbearing red fruits and chocolate within the cup. So this tasting wheel is pretty similar for both brew methods. I actually think it has a little bit more clarity through the Chemex, but I think that the Chemex is a very similar flavor profile to it. So there's not too much to differentiate between the two brew methods. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. For what it is slightly better than what I expected, but it's still my least favorite coffee out there, mostly because it lacks the sort of clarity that I'm looking for. I did appreciate the sweetness that it offered. I appreciated the fruit-forward cup that it offered. It lacked the florality as well, and I don't necessarily love fermentiness or chocolate within coffee, so those are kind of detracting factors. But all things considered, it's not necessarily the type of coffee I expected. It's a little better than what I was expecting. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. Again, I think that there's a type of people, a type of person that really enjoys the anaerobic natural processed Colombian coffees in general. They have very strong characteristics to them. This is a very intense cup of coffee. Again, if you really like the heaviness that comes within these coffees, that's the kind of the best direction I can point you to. A cup that lasts pretty long. This one offering a little bit more clarity does not necessarily overbear this cup with some attributes that really make this cup hard to pick out complexity, more components within it. So I think kind of somebody that may be looking for something a little cleaner in terms of the really heavy overbearing aspects, I think that's just kind of the best direction I can point to this coffee. All right, now the moment we've all been waiting for. We are going to reveal our top 5 favorite coffees from this advent calendar. And the way that this is going to work is I'm going to reveal the 4 runners-up in order of the day, not necessarily in order of where they finished, as I didn't necessarily rank the 4 runners-up. I just picked the 4 coffees that I felt were most worthy of some sort of notoriety or recognition. So we'll start with day 4 right here, which is the Kenya Bishop WHDX proprietary multi-stage wet-dry processed Kenya from Coffea Circular. And then we have day 9, which is the Jacu Yini wash processed Kenya from Damateo. We have day 12 right here, which is the Hartman Family Natural Katuai from Standout Coffee. We have day 19, which is the Key AA wash processed Kenya from Jacu. And then, to nobody's surprise, my favorite coffee of this advent calendar right here is day 7, the Altieri Alessa Gesha WX wash processed Panama from Coffea Circular. This is one of my favorite coffees of the entire year. It was always going to be a favorite to win this advent calendar, given just how much I enjoy wash processed Panamanian Geshas. Not only did this coffee offer wonderful florality, clarity, and sweetness, but it was actually a fruit-forward Panamanian Gesha, as the fresh cut stone fruits felt like the most dominant and defining attribute within this coffee. So this one right here was easily my favorite from the entire advent calendar, and don't be surprised to see this one on our top 10 coffees of the year list coming up in just about a week. So keep an eye out for that. But we will leave this review at that. If you've had an opportunity to try this coffee, or if you want to give your feedback on which coffees from this advent calendar were your favorite, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions of that, or these as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're already subscribed. I wanted to say thank you for everybody that contributed, everybody that watched. I wanted to wish everybody a happy holiday all around. It's been wonderful. Really love doing this KaffeBox Advent Calendar series every single year. Already looking forward to doing it again next year. But this right here has been a review of the Finca La Bonita Anaerobic Natural Processed Colombia from Jacu. Thank you for watching.